All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. So one of the big things that happened last week was when Ford and GM did a partnership with Tesla, the supercharger partnership. And one of the things that they've exposed is that they've also said that they're going to delay their ability to create a profitable electric vehicle by 2030. So today, let's do a deep dive on Ford. Let's better understand how their business is running. We've got several clips of Ford CEO Jim Farley being interviewed. And today we've got Hans Nelson joining us. He's a mechanical engineer. He's been an investor in Tesla for a long time. He has his own YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson and his Twitter. So thank you so much, Hans. Appreciate you joining me for the first time.
Thanks for having me, Herbert. I'm excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I know you've been around in Farzad's channel and you've been contributing quite nicely. We've met at the last Investors Day party that we were at, but you had a very incredible long tweet thread that I wanted to walk us all through because it's very nicely done where you've examined Ford in many different angles of how to really think about legacy automakers. So let's get started with that. So first off, we've got your thread that says, this is a must watch for anyone monitoring the progress of traditional car companies in transitioning to EVs. Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, exposes the top 9 keys to survival that most traditional auto companies fail to understand. So first off, Hans, you've watched quite a number of his deep dive interviews. Do you think Ford's going to succeed?
I think they definitely have the best chance of any of the American legacy automakers. So obviously they're far further along in their transition than GM or Stellantis, who really has even no strategy today to make that transition. So how will they stack up against competitors from like Korea? So you've got Kia, Hyundai, and then the competition coming out of China, the competition that they see from Tesla, that really remains to be seen. The transition to a new technology typically is a very difficult transition for large established companies to make. And so one of the things that even got me into investing in the first place was reading Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovators Dilemma. And so a lot of my framework that I use to analyze companies is based on his work, and then later the way that ARK Invest and Tony Seba have built on those concepts to understand how technology is going to revolutionize an industry, and then how individual companies either participate with that transformation or end up getting disrupted by it. And so using that framework, I noticed that Ford is doing a number of things correctly according to Clayton Christensen's playbook. And so that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe they will not go bankrupt. And we, of course, know that Tesla and Ford are the only 2 American companies never to have gone bankrupt yet. And obviously, Ford has a much longer history than Tesla. So they're working with a longer track record. They're more Lindy. They have proven very resilient to a number of existential threats in the past. And so they've got a history of being able to overcome changes and transitions like this. So I think that there's a lot in their corner that makes it possible for them to make this transition. But that said, I honestly believe that there will be a portion of Ford that ends up getting bankrupted, and that they will probably eventually spin out the EV division into its own separate company, and that actually will survive.
Yeah, exactly. I think that they're polar opposites to not only GM, but the other OEMs. I love the fact that they decided to be very, very transparent. They're sharing their financials. I love the fact that they've created a completely separate division. Now, currently
Mm-hmm.
today, the 3 divisions are still together within the Ford corporate, but like you said, very likely they're setting it up that if they needed to, they're going to spin it off because they need to cut that the connection to the dealerships and the old way to do business. It's yet remain to see whether or not that new Ford E Model E business unit is very different, if it's acting differently than the main. You can tell me
Mm-hmm.
more as we walk through, but certainly already acting differently than the others. So let's review this next tweet of yours. So the first principle that you liked was that Jim Farley understands that at this stage in Ford's transition to electric vehicles, he needs to focus their efforts and capital allocation an underserved electric vehicle segment rather than trying to design 25 different models for every possible consumer right now. Again, this is very different than what we keep hearing Mary Barr from GM saying. We're going to
Hmm.
create 25 EVs by 2025. And they've done one. But it's like, yeah, it's like, okay, so I like this. So they're not saying I'm going to create an electric vehicle for everything. They're going to do it for the things that they think works. Why don't we play that clip first, and then I'll get you to react to it.
We've learned about electrification is it's actually not about propulsion system, although that's interesting. It's really about what you can do outside of the propulsion system and also the software. So because it's a digital product, and our first generation EVs were analog products. So we're going to electrify commercial, larger three-row crossovers, pickup trucks, you know, high performance vehicles. We don't want to make commodity products. We want to participate in the part of the market where Ford knows the customer really well, and we can innovate on their behalf for things that they don't know.
Okay. Go ahead, Hans. Tell me what you think you heard, because it's a little different than what you had written there. Just tell me what you
Yeah,
heard.
the part that I was trying to pull out was there at the very end where he said we don't want to just make commodity products, that we want to serve portions of the consumer base that we know very well. And so he mentioned a couple commercial large 3-row SUVs, of course pickup trucks, and I think he mentioned also high performance vehicles. And so, you know, to establish a new business unit, you need a part of the market that you can attack that is relatively undefended or has relatively little competition. This is a great insight that Peter Thiel had, and is kind of the founding principle underneath the book 0 to 1, that that's a place where you can have a green field to work out an idea, create something on behalf of your customer that doesn't exist, and from there you can build on that momentum. And so Tesla pursued this exact strategy. They famously did it from a top-down approach. They started with the Roadster, just got the flywheel turning, made a few vehicles, learned a lot, and then proceeded on down to the performance sedan and the Model S, eventually then the Model X, the Model 3, the Model Y. And so they keep moving further and further down market. But what that means is that upper end of the market with the Model S Plaid is a very difficult market to compete in. And so Ford is not wanting to do what Lucid is doing and just try to go head to head. Yes, it's great to move down market because you can take your learnings and then you can apply that to the next generation vehicle. But instead of trying to go head to head with the Model S, Ford wants to go to segments where there's not an existing vehicle that really competes with them. And so they beat Tesla to the pickup truck market with the Ford F-150 Lightning. And even though the Mach-E and the Model Y are similar, in other ways they are somewhat different. And at least for Ford, that Mustang is such a huge brand that for them to go ahead and electrify the Mustang was a big, bold move. Unlike, the Hummer is kind of a name, but compared to Mustang, like, Hummer is very small, and they haven't really gone serious and produced that vehicle in any significant quantity, whereas the Mach-E has actually reached decent volume. And so that's what Ford is doing, is that they're not trying to spread themselves out too thin. They want to say, these are the customers that we know, these are the products that we know, and this is the area of the market where other competitors are not trying to basically. Here, let me go back. And this is an area of the market where we can actually have room to grow and then, roll that into future products. And so I think that this is a great strategy. It's basically, as I mentioned, the same strategy that Tesla used. But now that the top of the line market is crowded, they're looking for new areas to play. And so,
Where do you think Ford is going to go next? So you answered the question I was going to ask. So they did Ford 150, the Ford Mach-E, and you great answer on that one. Satisfied. I was going to say, well, but they just did these two. But tell me what you think the next, where they're going to head towards. Is there any hint that they've given or?
well, I mean, Jim said it. So I think the 3-row SUV, the large 3-row SUV, is going to be the next vehicle. It will either be that or potentially, I think, probably not far behind that will be a Fiesta. But building on the Lightning is the obvious next move, and just probably be the is it the Expedition that is the 3-row SUV that's built on the F-150 platform?
Makes a ton of sense, by the way, because I just interviewed Corey Steuben, and he was saying that he really thinks Tesla should do a 3-row SUV as the next thing, and CUV.
Well,
but yeah,
SUV, and those vehicles are so profitable. I mean, that is where Ford and GM have both retreated from the sedan. They don't want anything to do with that business because they can't make any money there. They're making all their money in pickup trucks, vans, SUVs, and primarily pickup trucks and SUVs. Vans are a good business for Ford, but not necessarily for GM. So that SUV segment is something where, Tesla doesn't have anything. Like the Model X is a great vehicle, but for me personally, I drive a Toyota Sequoia. We had 5 children, and so a Model X would never work for us. So we need something larger. And even for just 3 kids, it's really nice to have that 3rd row so people can spread out. You can have room for stuff. It's a great car with a great profit margin. Ford typically makes much higher margins on those vehicles. And so, I think that's one of those areas where they know the customer, they have a great platform, they have a great plan. And the Ford F-150 Lightning is the base that they can build on to make that product.
Underserved segments. I like it. Okay. So far, liking the strategy. The next thing you've got here is number 2. Jim Farley understands that creating compelling EVs isn't about giving consumers the same old car with a new powertrain. Thank goodness. Everybody, all the old legacies just thought, oh, it's just a car. I've done it forever. Just need electric vehicles. It's about giving them delightful new features and functionality that was never possible before. So let's watch that clip.
This turns out to be, and also lockable storage, the frunk. In a pickup truck, pretty much everything you carry in it is susceptible to theft. And the front power frunk, we call it the mega frunk, is bigger than the hatch for our best-selling sedans. So now there's this lockable storage that can be, you could put really valuable things in, and a pickup truck actually and also the F-150 Lightning is the only vehicle with that can carry 3 child seats as an electric.
Right. Wow.
It's really big. It's like
it
so
is
much
really
bigger than
big.
everyone else's electric vehicle. So even though it looks very traditional, actually we found out that what people find interesting about it actually isn't really the propulsion system. That's cool.
Yeah.
But what's really differentiating about it is
What do you
And then
think?
the other feature that there wasn't enough time for in that clip is the bidirectional charging, which he also mentioned being a huge hit with customers. And so this was something that they realized early on, and I think it was mentioned in the first clip as well, that the EV is now a software-defined vehicle, and that switch to making EVs digital products rather than analog products is another huge unlock in being able to provide customers with delightful new features and functionality. Just the overall platform allows you to do things, not having that engine up front gives you the frunk ability. Since you already have a battery on board and you're having to charge it one way, why not make that giant battery accessible for bidirectional charging so that you can run power tools off of it? These are things that are possible because the vehicle is now an EV instead of an ICE vehicle, but also because the software allows it to be used in ways that it was never before possible. And so when in their market research, they can find these things and they are actually doing a very good job of getting things into the hands of customers and getting a lot of customer feedback early on in the design process so that they can find what these features are going to be that really move the needle for their customers. And then they really go all out on them, make them front and center parts of not only their design philosophy, but then also their marketing efforts as well. So it is a great way to, I think Dave does a great job of explaining this, that, if you want to take market share in a market, it's not just about making something that's as good as the things that already exist that are out there. You really need to make something that's 10 times better, is what Dave Lee would say. I don't know that these features may make it all the way to 10 times better, but they're significantly better. And for an existing Ford customer, I think these can move the needle to say, hey, I want my Ford F-150, but I want the Ford F-150 now that has a frunk and that can charge my house, that I can take to the work site and run all my power tools with. So it's a good incentive that gets people to go ahead and move over.
Yeah, what my understanding is that when there's a new technology and you're trying to get somebody to move over from legacy, it can't just be two value propositions. It's got to be four or more. Like you said, it can't be just cheaper and faster. It's got to have additional features that is so compelling because it's really hard to move them. I just saw from Jan showed me that there's Mercedes in Germany. They don't even have a frunk. They built an electric vehicle, but they can't build it without the frunk or with a frunk. So just the fact that Ford was able to do this, it sounds simple because it's logical, but it's like, it just means that they really did design it rather than taking what they did before and then trying to remove things out, which is what other OEMs have done. Okay. So number 3, you said Farley recognizes that creating, yeah. Where are we now here? Boom. Farley recognizes that creating a software-defined vehicle is as much, if not more important than swapping out the powertrain. And the trend in China is demonstrating that a strong legacy brand may be counterproductive in that transition. So even just starting a brand new electric vehicle, so in fact, being an old legacy could actually be harmful. So he's already started to talk about a software-defined vehicle, which I know is number 4. But what exactly do you think he's referring to this? Should we watch the clip first?
We can go ahead and skip this clip, and I'll just say that in China, a number of the ICE companies, the manufacturing companies that make ICE vehicles in China, instead of creating EVs and then selling them under the same existing brand that already had traction in the country, they actually spun out entirely new brands, because what they found was it was difficult for consumers, like when consumers are looking for an EV that has a super compelling software user interface, that overhang of the old ICE vehicles that they're used to driving that have the traditional knobs and buttons and dials, that all of that customers were not associating with the type of software-defined user interface that they wanted in an EV. And so the companies just said, fine, we'll spin out new brands. We'll create an entirely new name to be associated with that experience, and it'll be easier for our customers to intuitively understand that that's what they're getting with these vehicles.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that hilarious? Because just a few short years ago, everybody kept saying the competition's coming. Don't you know? Toyota and GM, they've been doing this for 100 years. They've got 80 factories each. They could create this. And actually, it's now a Albatross, the brand.
Yep.
Not support. So that's very interesting. But although if you look at the way that disruptive technologies ever worked, it's almost always a brand new upstart taking over the brand new market, and it's rare that legacy is able to compete. Okay, so what else we have here? We've got number 4. The business model of traditional auto manufacturers makes it impossible to create a compelling software-defined vehicle. So the business model. So Jim Farley is bringing all of the electrical and software architecture in-house. So I'm going to play the clip 4, but I know that there's also that software clip that we need to play that most people have already heard. So let's play this one.
If I explain to, the listeners how crazy our software system is and why it's so difficult for legacy car companies to get software right. Well, I'll do it very quickly.
Yeah.
So to save probably $500 a vehicle, or let's say 350 quid a vehicle,
Yeah.
we farmed out all the modules that control the vehicles to our suppliers because we could bid them against each other. So Bosch would do the body control module, someone else would do the seat control module, someone else would do the engine control module.
Right.
And we'd have about 150 of these modules of semiconductors all through the car. The problem is the software are all written by, 150 different companies, and they don't talk to each other.
Right.
And so even though it says Ford on the front,
Yeah.
I actually have to go to Bosch to get permission to change their seat control software.
Right.
So
Wow.
even if I had a high-speed modem in the vehicle and I had the ability to write their software, it's actually their IP. And I have 150, we call it the loose confederation of software providers, 150 completely different software programming languages. All the structure of the software is different. It's millions of code, and we can't even understand it all. So, that's why at Ford, we've decided in the second generation product to completely insource the electrical architecture.
Right.
And to do that, you need to write all the software yourself. But just remember, car companies haven't written software like this.
Yeah.
Ever. They've
Yes.
never written software. So we're literally writing how the vehicle operates, the software to operate the vehicle for the first time ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
New talent. And actually some of the Ford people are really important because you can get the best software person from Apple, but they don't know anything about safety critical systems.
No.
You don't want to fire an airbag off the cloud. You need to do
Yes.
that in the vehicle. So, you need a mix of traditional people, but you got to make that decision. Do you cut and do it all yourself?
Yeah.
Or you keep trying with these, modules in your supply chain?
Yeah.
And I watch way too many companies continue to try. I won't name the names because they're competitors, but it's shocking to me,
Yeah.
how many people are sticking with very old electric architectures and software from other people, Confederacy. It will never work. And no matter
Yeah.
how many software engineers they hire, your
Yeah.
car's not going to work. You're going to
Yeah.
have problems. So we've just decided to go student body left on that and insource it all.
But yeah, my take on that is just basically the same. I think that we've heard a lot of people say software is much more difficult than a lot of analysts on Wall Street understand. And there's a reason that all the best software comes out of Silicon Valley companies. And Tesla, having been built in Silicon Valley and being a software first company from the foundation, obviously is much further ahead in this realm than any legacy company. And so even if you believed, which I don't, that Ford and GM and these other companies with manufacturing experience have an advantage in building cars, they are severely disadvantaged when it comes to the software of the cars. And we've seen this, for example, with VW and their Cariad effort, that just has not worked out well, that they thought that they could just throw more engineers at the problem. And of course, that didn't do anything. It actually made the problem worse. And here Jim is giving you some understanding of specifically why that is. It's because they have a spider web of complexity under the hood. It's complex electrical architecture that they're getting different pieces and parts from all sorts of different suppliers, and getting those things to talk together is this piecemeal patchwork of insanity. And I think probably a good analogy would be the way that Twitter's code base worked, for anyone who's been following along with that transition, that it's a Rube Goldberg fractal of just real weird craziness. And you would change one little thing over here and you think, oh, that should fix this problem. And it just sets off this ripple effect of other cascading failures throughout the system. And so this is what car companies have been dealing with. And I'm excited that Ford understands that and that they're going to be in-housing everything, especially down to the electrical architecture, because what that opens up the door for them, if they're going to make their own electrical components that means that they can also shift to a 48-volt architecture and get off of 12 volts, which also, if they become the first legacy automaker to successfully make that switch behind Tesla, will help put them in a great competitive advantage.
Yeah. I did not know was it's pretty obvious for people like me to say, oh yes, they, automakers do not know software. But then the part he said was, you can't just hire regular software engineers out there. They need to be somebody who probably need mechanical engineering or something knowing about how systems work, or life threatening critical systems or something like that. And he made that comment, so it's very interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
and
Okay.
I think at
Yeah.
the end of his comment, he also said that he's surprised at the number of other legacy automakers who keep trying
Right.
to create software with that approach, and they are throwing more and more money at the problem, more and more resources, human capital, software engineers, and it's never ever ever going to work. And so, Toyota would be an example of this. Currently GM would be an example of this. Volkswagen would still be an example of this. And so any company who's pursuing that path, until you see them change, there's literally no hope of them fixing this in time to create by 2030 or 2035, it's going to be the standard expectation that your vehicle, whether it's ICE or EV, has a compelling software-defined user interface. Just like no one uses Blackberries anymore, no one is going to use clickety-knobbity buttons in their cars. And so if you want to sell cars in the 2030s, you have to fix this problem. And there's a very limited number of companies that are doing this. And it's setting up to be Tesla, the Chinese, potentially the Koreans, and potentially Ford.
Yeah. So it's not just an iPad. They slap onto the front. That's not just an iPad, fancy iPad. But I'm getting a lot of respect for him because he's being transparent and he gets it. Now it's another thing whether or not he can change, the big giant ship and change the direction. They're struggling, but at least he's the one that gets it, right? Okay. Number 5, he believes that moving back towards vertical integration will be a strategic advantage
We've
in
got the
preserving
clip
jobs.
up on the screen.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, thank you for pointing that out.
You're
So,
welcome.
believes that moving back towards vertical integration will be a strategic advantage in preserving jobs for Ford employees, which would otherwise be displaced. This will be key in maintaining complex labor relationships with unions. So there's a couple points here, right? So number one, moving back towards vertical integration, it was originally Ford in the early 1900s where they were fully vertically integrated. And it was only in the 70s and 80s that they decided to farm it out with strategic partnerships. And now they're realizing they got to come back to vertical integration. But I like the fact that he's now pointing out that if they do that, he needs to deal with this labor relationship with unions. And so this is a way to do that. Expand the business beyond just car manufacturing, still hire the same number of people. What do you think about this? Should I play the clip first?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead and do that.
We have so many hourly workers and the cars are simpler. So they're 30-40% less labor content. So if we just turned all of our plants over to electric, we'd have to let go 30% of our people.
Right.
And so vertical integration has another advantage is that we can actually give our team new jobs that are they're sustainable, that they will have a job for the next 50 years, making motors, inverters, gearboxes, things that we used to outsource. We never made axles or differentials for internal combustion engines, but we brought all that in-house because and the people that really understand the electric transition, they didn't understand that it created just as many problems, like the labor overhang, that they hadn't thought about.
I love it, Hans. Love it, love it, love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not that Tesla didn't think about these things. They obviously have been thinking about these things for a long time, and they designed the cars in such a way that they could take advantage of the fact that it was a lot easier to produce. But this is a good recognition by Jim that he can bring things that were previously outsourced to tier 2, tier 3 suppliers in-house in Ford, and he can maintain his overall headcount. Hopefully that will help him maintain his relationship with his labor unions, because that's going to be another very difficult transition that legacy car companies have to navigate in their transition to EVs. Is, they've got union labor force who wants to negotiate on behalf of these workers and make sure that they continue to have jobs and that those jobs continue to be paid at the rate at least that they are currently, if not even at a higher rate in the future. And so this gives him more chips to bring to the bargaining table for those negotiations.
I know this might not be a question you can answer. It sounds like it's a very legal question, but for them separating out the 3 business units, does that set them up that if they needed to, they can take the electric vehicle business unit and spin it off and have nothing to do with dealerships, nothing to do with unions, and just start pretty well fresh? Or is there so much legal connection there that they won't be able to do that?
That's a great question. I think it will depend on how much of their legacy infrastructure they rely on. And this is just speculation on my part, because like you said, I'm not a legal expert. I definitely don't know. And I think that is an opportunity that, someone in the Tesla community has to help bring a value-added piece of information to the community. But yeah, I think if you're cutting deals with dealers to move metal more at this stage, basically by not going direct to online sales from the beginning with their Model E, that they may be saddling themselves down with some difficult baggage in the future.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Number 6, Jim Farley is thinking deep into the supply chain, has major concerns about how dependent the lithium refinery industry is on China. This view reflects Elon Musk's similar concerns. I loved how when he was at the Twitter space with Elon, and Elon was going, hey, we can do more than superchargers. We can do software. Jim Farley responded with, hey, I'm really excited about your lithium refinery business. Tell me more about that. So I think he's angling for that. Let's look at the clip.
So people still don't understand all the second and third order issues we have to work through. 80-90% of lithium and nickel is processed in China.
Yeah.
Do we onshore all that? Even if it's mined in Indonesia or South America, it still gets shipped to China for processing. And it's a really dirty process to process these raw materials into slurries that we put in batteries. So I think we're now really looking those issues in the eye and excited about solving them one by one, just like we did in the teens with combustion.
Aren't they a little late? Shouldn't have they been doing this 5 years ago?
Probably. I mean, a lot of these things they probably should have been doing about 5 years ago, but Jim wasn't the CEO of the company then. And I think that they really got to work basically as soon as he was appointed as CEO. And I think he's been driving them in a good direction ever since. I want to, just also congratulate you on noting that in the announcement for the supercharger standard. That was something that jumped out at me as well, that Jim was very interested in the lithium refinery there in Corpus Christi. And I took notice of that because where, a lot of the lithium mining industry experts are saying that the bottleneck is going to be mining. It's not going to be refining. It's going to be mining. I understand why they have those concerns. And I think that, long term, there's still a lot of potential that we're not going to grow the mining capacity fast enough. But in the near term, American companies also have geopolitical concerns about the relationship that we have with China. And beside all that, it's expensive to have to move this material multiple times. A lot of lithium right now is mined in South America. And like you said, that's being shipped from South America all the way to China. It's being refined in China and then shipped all the way back to the United States, either as finished batteries or even as battery material constituents that then get converted into batteries here in the US. And I mean, anyone who is trying to design an efficient supply chain is going to look at that and be like, that's crazy. Why do we have to do that? And so the IRA puts a lot of incentives in place to onshore a lot of this technology and this refining capacity. And so what Tesla's doing there is the right move. And I think it helps to color what is Elon thinking about when he's saying that refining is the bottleneck. And personally, I'm currently interpreting that comment as refining that is not dependent on China solely is the bottleneck. And, you know, Jim said it, it's 80 to 90% of all lithium refining is done in China. Well, the whole rest of the world cannot transition to a sustainable energy future if something happens in China and the rest of the world's refining capacity is only 10 to 20% of all of the lithium. Lithium is at the core of all of these sustainable technologies. And so we have to be able to be independent from China in the way that we process it, turn it into batteries so that we can have mega packs, so that we can have EVs, so that we can have other products that rely on this. So I think that Jim sees that as well. This is a data point that confirms Elon's perspective on that. And hopefully Tesla will actually be very successful in getting that plant online. One of the other factors is that the current lithium refining process was not originally developed just to serve the battery industry. That lithium is used in lots of things. And so the supply chain for lithium, you know, they have a number of customers with a whole different set of requirements that they need from the lithium that's getting processed. And so if we're designing lithium refining capacity here in the United States, it can be set up in a more efficient and also hopefully cleaner way than they're currently processing in China. And that will be a win for everybody.
Oh man, Hans, I'm really enjoying this. This is good. I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Hans. And we've got some more to go. You know, it's one thing for them for Jim and others to say, yep, I get this. This is an issue. We got to start looking at it. They should have done it earlier. But also, so what? Can you actually do something about it? I think we totally underestimate that Tesla can act and very quickly. Next thing you know, there's a factory that they're groundbreaking and it's already there. They just move quickly and they're very smart about it. And then he said too, Elon has promised that they reinvented how to do lithium refinery. I keep bringing this up that somebody was brought up at an investor call and they said, "Oh, so you're going into lithium refinery? I mean, it typically takes 7 years for that to produce anything." And Elon said, "I think it'll take us 2 or 3 years." And then I've since heard that it might actually be faster than that because they go, we've reinvented a lot of things. So, anyways, just something that we're so lucky about Tesla, but let's see what Ford will do, even though they said this, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think
All
that
right.
the fact that they've already partnered now on the North American Charging Standard, that opens up the door to partner in a whole number of different areas. And that was one of the predictions that I made when we got the announcement that they were going to have, you know, there was a lot of speculation. Jim and Elon are going to be on a space together. What are they going to announce? And the obvious thing was definitely the supercharger network. But then the question was asked, okay, what are some of the other things that they might announce? And to me, the most straightforward second answer is raw materials, because this has got to be a huge concern for anyone that is looking to scale into significant numbers of EVs later in this decade and going into the 2030s.
I agree with you, actually. Haven't really thought of it as much as you just did, but it makes sense because it doesn't harm the legacy brand Ford to say that we're now partnering with Supercharger. That actually harms their brand a little bit more. But, you know, we're working together with Tesla to secure lithium and batteries. Even that does not, in fact, harm them. In fact, makes them look good, right? We're here for the future, sustainable future, and we're going to work together. I like that. Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so number 7 here is most car companies and consumers highly underestimate how hard it is to scale battery production. But Jim does not. Come on. Really? Of course they know how hard it is, isn't it? Obvious. Let's listen to the clip.
We have been building the battery plants. It's hard to scale battery plants. Like I have to tell you, building the plant is the easy part. But
Yeah.
actually building cells in high quality at high scale is much harder than we thought, even though
Right.
we've been building stuff for 120 years.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder than we thought. And then, goodness gracious, to go back and get into the supply chain, we now pretty much vertically integrate all the raw material purchases. So we're going to the mine and buying the raw materials and then arranging for the processing and all the way to our battery plants. And that's all new. Like, we've had to
Yeah.
hire thousands of new people,
Right.
mineral experts, processing experts, logistics experts, actually, child labor and corruption,
Yeah.
because we have to make sure that this is all done the right way. When people buy that electric car, they probably have
Go ahead.
So yeah, I think that Jim does a pretty good job there of at least explaining the basics of what it is that makes mass battery production very, very difficult. Because yeah, and he insinuated this by talking about the fact that they have to go all the way down to the mine level. That the quality of your batteries, it's a garbage in, garbage out type of thing. That in order to have batteries that work, and remember, lithium batteries are very susceptible to safety challenges. That if you get something wrong, the battery literally explodes. And if you don't have a good safety system in place, it starts a cascading fire throughout your entire pack. And so the margin for error is extremely low. So you can't have batteries that are 99.9% good. Because if you have 99.9% good batteries and there's 1,000 batteries in your pack, then that means you've got one bad battery in every single vehicle.
Mhm.
And if you've got just one standard deviation, like this vehicle, maybe your pack can handle one, but that means maybe 1 out of every 100 of your vehicles has multiple bad batteries in it. And then that's the one that creates the fires.
Yeah.
And so, this is the exact type of issue that we've seen with the Bolt, is that quality on these batteries is a hard thing to deal with. It has to start with the quality of the battery cells themselves. Obviously, significantly includes the sophistication of the battery management software system as well. And so there's a very, very high bar for the quality of the cells that need to be manufactured, which means there's a high bar for every single component that goes into that battery. The lithium has to be at a very high grade. And you're talking about tiny elements that are, you need a microscope to see how big these are. And they're literally being processed at those microscopic levels. And so it's just a very intricate product. And then, we've seen the pictures or the video that Tesla has released on the equipment that they use to manufacture the 4680s. And so you have to get all of those machines dialed in, working perfectly every single time, repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again. So when you finally get this giant, this is another Rube Goldberg contraption. When you finally get all of this machinery working in perfect unison and all of your supply chain feeding it perfect quality ingredients, you don't want to mess with anything. And so that's why it takes a long time for new chemistries to make it into commercial battery manufacturing. We see these announcements all the time about this new breakthrough chemistry, or solid state batteries are going to save the world and they're going to change everything. It's not going to be something that is accessible quickly, because mass manufacturing of batteries is an incredibly beautiful symphony. And if you make one little change, you throw the whole thing into chaos. And so you have to be very, very deliberate about how you make those changes. And if you're a new company trying to create batteries for the first time and mass manufacture them at scale, then there's a lot that you have to figure out, and you get to learn the hard way. And it's going to be expensive. It's going to take longer than you think by, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 times. and you're going to come away with some nice scars. But luckily for Ford, they are getting into this game sooner than a lot of other companies, and hopefully with strategic partnerships, they'll make good progress. It seems like they've got larger scale than any other, American domestic EV manufacturer besides Tesla. So that means that they're further down this road than, GM, Stellantis, and then a lot of foreign competitors outside of China as well.
Yeah. This is where the advantage for Tesla, who's been doing, electric vehicles now for, I
Well, it
say
goes to
2012.
show just how
actually done it since
ambitious the
2003.
4680 is.
And then I was going to say, with the 4680, by the time these guys even catch up to the basics, there's already another leapfrog. So it's nice to hear Jim recognizing that, step one is vertical integration. We need to be in batteries now. Okay.
Mhm.
And we're going to work on this as opposed, yes, I will, of course, you're going to partner with as much as you can, but you need to get into this now. So step 1 and 2, you got to get going. You got to get going. Redefine the company. So he gets it. Okay. Number 8. Number 8. He understands that the future of automotive profits are in software provided to customers over the lifetime of the vehicle, not necessarily in the upfront purchase price. This is a massive shift. Ooh, okay. You made that in court. Go ahead and let's see. Clip 8.
I think that the affordable vehicles will be a really difficult interior experience because of all the information. It's going to be really intimidating. So customizing the digital aspect of the vehicle is going to be, we think, a real difference maker. And we think basically that the car will be very difficult to make money on. It would be really more the software and physical experience and the second and third owner as much as the first. And that's how we're starting to think about this opportunity for Ford, because we want to bring something different.
Yeah.
Better.
Yes. I mean, it seems
A massive shift. Go ahead.
Yes. And, once again, this just reinforces the intelligence of the strategy and approach that Elon has been taking to cars for years and years now. And those of us that understand the FSD opportunity, that's the number one biggest opportunity for software as a service recurring revenue from your vehicle. But there's going to be others. And so having an app store for Tesla, allows them to potentially monetize entertainment apps and work apps, productivity, all types of things inside the vehicle. So at least Jim recognizes this, and he understands that there's an opportunity for Ford to try and deal themselves into a piece of that action. Now, whether they can execute on that is something that remains to be seen. But for Ford to be saying this, it means that, the other automakers, whether they realize it or not, it means that Elon is right. And so at least Ford is trying to move, Jim is trying to move forward in the direction of actually earning revenue on, you heard him say it, not just the first owner, but the second owner and the third owner. So that's something that they're hoping to monetize over the life of a vehicle instead of just an upfront purchase price. So, he didn't go into enough details to know exactly what types of applications or software that they're intending to provide. But based on context from the rest of the video, he's talking about, customers that they know very well. And one of those is commercial clients. And so fleet operators, especially fleet operators that use trucks. And so I think that they actually do have an opportunity to create software for those applications that Tesla is not potentially ever going to get into, or at least they may provide those that software platform to fleet owners before Tesla ends up making it there. Now, I'm not talking about fleets of robo taxis. I'm talking about fleets of work trucks for grid operators and for utility companies and construction companies, these types of, or government government contractors that have large fleets of vehicles, that those are specific applications where Ford has the opportunity to bring something to market in a unique way that's different than Tesla, and could be something that they could actually earn significant revenue from.
Yeah. It's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
If you're a
Probably
hardware
not.
company,
Mhm.
it's been doing it for hundreds of years, realizing that you got to become software, great, step one. But, Tesla's it was a software company who started to make
Mhm.
cars, and you know where their head is, making the hardware basically cheap and cost like not making any money on it. And so as you make the hardware lower price, you have you don't really have much of an interior, you just have everything software driven, then you make money on the subscriptions. How are these hardware guys going to compete with that if you have a totally new subscription model from the software? He gets it, but how do you take a
Mhm.
company for hundreds of years built with a culture of hardware? You said that you knew a little bit, you wanted to talk a little bit about culture. Did you want to explain that?
We could definitely talk about it here. So, Joe Justice is one of my go-tos for
Yeah.
understanding how agility, and this is another one of the reasons why I gravitated towards Farzad's work early on, was there's this perspective from people who have worked inside the company that understand how flat and
Yeah.
empowered Tesla operates, and that they're how big is the company now? I think it's like 130 or 40,000 employees,
Yeah.
something
Mhm.
to that effect. And
Mhm.
they essentially operate like a startup at incredible scale. This is something that is just has never before existed. We've never had an organization of humans that large that operates that quickly, that rapidly, that
Yeah.
anyone who goes into work can make decisions at an executive level about whatever it is that they're working on. And they don't have to ask anyone for permission. Can I make this change? They don't have to ask anyone in finance, hey, is there money available for me to try this? They don't have to do any of those things. They just do what they think will move the needle in the correct direction based on the project that they're working on that day.
Yeah.
And sometimes they win, sometimes they fail. When they fail, you know what? That's that's part of the price of improving rapidly. And Farzad has communicated this extremely well, that as an employee, a lot of times it feels extremely chaotic and uncomfortable and difficult because you're constantly running up against, oh, I made a mistake here. And there's not all the nice systems in place that make it feel super comfortable. And, you're actually, because you are empowered to make good decisions, you're expected to make good decisions regularly. And so there's a lot of demand on the output that you're creating. This is just not something that a company like Ford is set up to compete with.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's not something that any company is set up to compete with. And it's one of the reasons I have such high conviction in Tesla and am so concentrated in my Tesla position. So I think that even though Jim and Ford recognize a lot of the strategic things that they need to do moving forward, they're really competing against everyone else. And I think Jim even mentioned this, they're looking at their competition as Hyundai, Kia, and they're looking at their competition as Chinese automakers. And he didn't even mention Tesla when he said that. And it's because he realizes that they are not going to compete with Tesla. They're just trying to survive. And hopefully, maybe, if the stars align properly, they have a chance to get second.
I love it. And this is exactly the ninth point, which I love this ninth point, and I love what he said, what his clip here. So you point out that the big point is he understands that he has to insulate the group doing the hard work of innovation necessary to transition to EVs. Without insulating it, without protecting that group, the rest of the company will kill it. I love it. That's great. And watch this clip. I just think that this is a good clip.
People wouldn't know this, but we're talking about it, so I'll tell you.
Yeah.
The F-150 Lightning was a complete pariah inside the company. Like, most people were like, why are we doing that? That's a really stupid project. And we had a group we called Team Edison because of Mr. Ford's friendship with Thomas Edison. We
Right.
created, and they had to actually leave the company. We put them in downtown Detroit in a separate building, and they
Wow.
came up with that concept of the vehicle. And they happened to report to me, and I watched the company kind of, push against them, like literally try to kill the project. And it was a small group, like most good things in life. It was a small group in a very small building fighting for this idea. They continue to.
Hans, you cut the clip too short. Continue
It
to what?
runs out at
Anyway.
60 seconds, unfortunately. I hate YouTube clips. I'm not going to do that in the future. But yes, so it's you understand, like, these are the cultural dynamics that exist inside of most companies that make it so hard to move to the next thing. And I think this is a good place to go back to the Innovators Dilemma. Clayton Christensen observed, I think, only 2 examples of companies in the whole list of case studies that he examined that were hard drive manufacturers that managed to survive a transition between one hard drive technology and the next hard drive technology. And both of those companies, what they had to do was they had to spin out a smaller company and get it outside of the boundaries of their existing company, because what happens when you have this new technology is that it's a niche product and it serves a low-level customer, and it doesn't generate any revenue and it doesn't move the needle. And so anyone who is responsible for the earnings of a large company and they are trying to grow revenue, they have their targets. We're trying to grow revenue this year by 3% or 5% or 10%. And you look at this thing over here and it's like, that thing makes 0.0001% of the revenue that my current products make. It's never going to move the needle for me. So let's stop wasting time. Let's stop messing around with it. Let's focus on the things that can move the needle. But what they don't understand is that thing that they're discounting is an exponential technology. And not only is it going to eventually move the needle, it's going to move the needle so much that your existing products are not going to have customers to sell to, because this new technology is going to steal them away from you. And so insulating that company, and then also the opportunity and the technology grow together. That at first you've got to solve a lot of low-level problems for the technology, and like we said, the use case is so small and so niche, and the customers are not very plentiful. You've got to work with all those problems, and so you don't need a huge team of people trying to solve that problem. You need a small team. And so that small team working with a small set of customers continues to grow. And then the organization is coupled to the market size, and that organization grows as the technology grows and gets more and more customers. And so I like what they're doing by isolating the Edison team in Tesla or inside of Ford. They at least halfway understand this concept. It doesn't seem like they fully understand it, and I see too much crossover. So I'm giving Jim some props in at least getting the ball started and making the progress that he's made. Hopefully he can generalize this to larger scale within the company and realize, and potentially that is what the Model E team will eventually become. And this is why I think in order for Ford to survive, Model E has to be split off from the rest of the company, because this exact point.
Okay. I don't think we're going to have time with Darren Palmer. He's the VP of Global Electric Vehicle. Did you want to just talk to it? I'm not going to be able to show a clip, I think, at this point, but what did you know about him?
So Darren Palmer was actually one of the heads of the Team Edison, and he had a lot of great commentary in an interview that he did with Sandy Monroe on the Monroe Live podcast. And he added some good context around understanding the customer. So he, I think, at one point was heading up the development of the Ford Fiesta, which is a huge product for Ford abroad. It sells here in the United States some, but that's actually a big product for them in other global markets. And one of the things that they ran into that they struggled with was it's a hard product to sell and make money on. And what they realized with the Ford Fiesta was they needed to give that car something extra. And it kind of goes back to the same conversation that we were having earlier that Ford discovered with the Mega Frunk and the bidirectional charging on the F-150 Lightning. Like, you've got to create some appeal to the car to either make it sexy in some way or to give it some aspirational quality to it that will get customers to pay a little bit extra for it. And it seems like that is something that they're thinking about as they are trying to develop whatever that next generation mass market EV is going to be. And they're trying to keep it from just being a generic point A to point B transportation unit. They want to have something that customers will look at it and get excited about and want to own that product specifically compared to, the Toyota Corolla-esque EV. And we'll see how they fare with that effort.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hans. That was fun, very informative. Really appreciated you taking the time to break down that video. Lots of things I hadn't heard about. I'm sure the audience hadn't heard about, but it's important because this is a view into how legacy automakers are thinking. Some of them get it. If you actually talk to other CEOs from other legacy, they probably won't even say half of this thing. So part of it is understanding what you have to do, and the other part is actually making the organization do it. So thank you, Hans. Appreciate you joining me. So people, please follow Hans on his Twitter at Hans C. Nelson. And then you should also check out his YouTube channel, Hans C. Nelson, as well. He's got, he just started, but he broke through the 1,000 hours already, really growing fast. So check him out and subscribe to him. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you guys soon. Thanks, Hans.
Thanks for having